Look at a mountain ridge that becomes a road, a wall, and a signal line. The Great Wall was not built to draw a straight line across China. It was built to slow horsemen, steer them into narrow gates, and buy time. Follow it from desert edge to sea cliffs. See how a frontier turns into a machine that watches, speaks, and holds. In the next minutes, we map the route and the reason. We show why the line bends with ridges and passes. We open its body with rammed earth, stone facing, brick, mortar, and drains. We meet the builders, soldiers, farmers, artisans, and punished labor. We solve the hardest part, supply, and climb with loads to high towers. We read the architecture of towers, crenels, gates, and the road on top. We compare eras and regions from Qin and Han to Ming. Then we build one section end to end. Finally, we count the cost, clear the myths, and state the core idea. The wall works as a network, not a fence. The wall begins with a frontier, not a line on a map. A frontier is movement, threat, and time. Leaders needed to slow raids from the north. They needed to steer riders toward gates and garrisons. They needed to pass signals faster than a cavalry sprint. The answer was a route that used the land itself. The route climbed ridges, crossed saddles, and skirted basins. It touched rivers where water and clay were near. It avoided swamps and soft loess when rain turned tracks to glue. It sought places where a few towers could watch many miles. Look at the north and northwest of ancient China. Steppe and semi-desert spread like a sea. Horsemen could appear, strike, and vanish. A straight fence across this sea was impossible. But ridges and passes offered narrow gates. A ridge forces a column to stretch and slow. A saddle funnels riders into a thin stream. If you add a wall and towers to that spine, you get time. Time to gather a unit. Time to light a beacon. Time to close a gate. In 1 minute, we will see how sightlines shaped every decision. An engineer on the survey chose ground the way a sailor chooses wind. He climbed to a crest and checked what the next tower could see. He measured with steps and markers, not with modern optics. He noted where smoke would rise clear in dry weather. He noted where fog and dust would blind the view. If towers could not see each other, the route shifted. A small bend could restore the chain of sight. A short detour could save hours in a crisis. Visibility alone was not enough. The route also had to feed itself. Crews needed clay, stone, and timber. They needed water every day. They needed fuel for cooking and brick kilns. The wall therefore tried to grow from local earth. Rammed earth worked where soil was dense and dry. Stone facing worked where rock lay within reach. Brick became common when kilns stood near the alignment. Each choice cut hauling distance and saved animals and men. In a minute, we will open the wall's body and see these choices up close. Now picture the sentry on a ridge in late autumn. Wind presses his cloak against the crenels. The air is clear and dry. He watches the next tower on the opposite knoll. On the tower platform stands a beacon basket. Dung and brush lie ready below. One thin smoke column means routine. 2 means alert. 3 means an active threat. At night, the code turns to flame. The message jumps from hill to hill. It outruns hooves. It crosses valleys that would take hours on foot. This protocol ruled the spacing of towers and the pace of construction. The route also obeyed water. Without water, there is no mortar, no life, no work. The line edged toward springs and seasonal streams. It stepped higher on soft ground to avoid flood scours. It planted drains wherever rain ran wild. In the dry belt, crews cut channels to protect bases from flash flows. In rolling loess, they built wider berms to spread weight. In rocky country, they anchored foundations into ledges. Each choice turned weather from enemy into constraint. Seasonality wrote its own calendar. In the rains, soil grew heavier and carts bogged down. Crews switched to quarrying, stockpiles, and repair. They fixed formwork, cleared drains, and set scaffolds. When skies dried, they packed layers and lifted parapets. They pushed loads by dawn and dusk and rested at noon. Camps moved in short hops along the alignment. Every stop sat near water and shelter from the wind. Every camp left behind stakes, pits, and the memory of a day's march. The wall on paper looks like a thread. On the ground, it is a bundle of solutions. There is the main rampart. There are towers spaced by sight and range. There is a roadway on top for men and pack animals. There are side paths that climb from valleys to the crest. There are depots with grain, arrows, and spare timbers. There are drains, culverts, and cutoffs that handle storms. Together, they make a controlled zone several hundred paces wide. The enemy does not face a single obstacle. He enters a field managed by speed, sight, and distance. Administrators used the line to count and control. Gates recorded caravans, troops, and settlers. Permits tracked loads of salt, grain, and iron. Tally marks on bricks traced crews and batches. Reports moved along the same ridge road that soldiers used. A frontier of dust and rumor became a ledger with dates and names. This was not decoration. It was survival for border counties that lived by timing and trust. Terrain set traps that needed no drama. A steep approach forced dismounts. A hairpin bend broke a charge. A false flat hid a ditch from a distance. The route exploited each feature. Builders made the hard place harder and the easy line costly. A raider kept his tempo only on the defender's terms. When he slowed, towers counted him. When he turned, gates waited. When he pressed on, signal fire outran him. Culture and fear also shaped choices. Families near the line wanted fields not to flood. Traders wanted a safe road to markets. Commanders wanted a standard they could trust from province to province. The route balanced all three. It kept a high ground where crops were few. It crossed river paths near fords and ferries. It tied into older roads that linked forts and towns. A wall that ignored people would fail in the first bad season. Small adjustments mattered. One more tower on a blind curve might be worth a week of work. One extra drain could save a slope in a summer storm. A slight shift to a sunnier shoulder could melt snow a day sooner in spring. Each tweak cut risks the map could not show. Each tweak came from feet on the ground, not theory alone. Think of the frontier as a system that learns. A breach revealed a weak saddle. Next year, the route added berms and a forward ditch. A flood cut a ramp. The crews returned with stone steps and stronger culverts. A fire burned a beacon store. The depot moved behind a windbreak and got a clay cap. The line improved by record, memory, and pain. Over time, the route that hugged the land looked inevitable. It was not. It was tuned by failure until it worked. The chapter's idea is simple. The Great Wall follows the logic of terrain, time, and supply. It is powerful because it buys minutes and miles, not because it is thick everywhere. It forces an enemy into corridors the defenders know. It links towers into a voice that carries over hills. It anchors administration to ground that can be reached in all seasons. It exists where ridges, water, and materials make sense together. In a moment, we will open the materials and techniques behind this route. We will show how rammed earth behaves like stone when compacted well. We will see where builders face slopes with dressed rock. We will see how brick kilns rose beside the line when fuel and clay allowed it. We will explain mortars and drains that kept the wall standing through storms. Then the structure on the map will gain weight, texture, and reason in your mind. Materials decide what a wall can be. Builders chose what the land offered, then shaped it to behave like a fortress. 3 bodies formed the wall's core: rammed earth, stone masonry, and brick. Mortars bound them, drains preserved them. Each piece solved a local problem and reduced hauling. Start with rammed earth. Crews built 2 lines of formwork and filled the gap with a thin layer of damp soil. They used long wooden mauls to strike it hundreds of times. The layer compacted until it rang under the tool. Then the next layer went on. Each lift was low enough for a standing worker to reach with full force. Moisture had to be right. Too wet, and the material smeared and later slumped. Too dry, and it would not lock. Foreman tested by squeezing a fistful. If it held shape but did not shine, it was ready. Gravel and sand improved interlock. Lime dust improved weathering. In wind belts, crews mixed in slightly coarser aggregates to resist erosion. When the forms were stripped, the face showed a clean, striped texture from each lift. This was not mere dirt. Properly rammed, its density approached soft rock. It took a blade only on the surface. It held weight and kept shape through seasons. Stone solved other problems. On ridges, rock lay close to the surface. Crews quarried ledges and dressed blocks just enough to seat them. A common scheme used a rubble core between two faces of larger stones. Through stones tied the faces together. At corners and stairwells, heavier dressed blocks anchored the geometry. Stone stepped with the slope. It tolerated frost better than earth and resisted scouring on the windward side. Where rock was abundant, facing stones rose course by course and locked into the core. On very steep spurs, builders dug keys into bedrock and built upward from that tooth. This lowered settlement and kept the line true. Brick entered when clay and fuel were near. Clay was mixed, de-aired, and pressed into wooden molds. Green bricks dried under shelter. They were fired in clamp kilns or simple updraft kilns built near the alignment. Fuel came from brush, dung, and whatever timber the ration allowed. Bricks offered uniform size and faster stacking once a supply existed. They resisted weather better than bare rammed faces in wet zones. They also made tower openings, stairs, and parapets more precise. Many bricks bore stamps marking the workshop or crew. That mark traced batches back to a responsible unit and helped enforce quality. Mortar turned stacks into a mass. Lime mortar began with slaking quicklime into a creamy paste, then mixing with sand and water. The paste carbonated over days and weeks, gaining strength as it absorbed air. Where better water resistance was needed, builders added finely ground brick or kiln ash to densify the matrix. Clay-rich bedding was sometimes used inside cores, but exposed joints favored lime for durability. Curing required shade and time. Crews protected fresh work with mats and simple screens. A rushed wall cracked in its first dry spell. A patient wall tightened and shed water. Drainage saved everything. Water will always win if ignored. The wall-top roadway had a slight crown so rain ran to the edges. Stone scuppers or weep holes pierced the parapet at intervals. At the base, small culverts crossed under the wall in gullies to avoid damming flows. On slopes, stepped aprons broke the fall of water. In low belts, crews cut shallow ditches upslope to steal the energy of flash floods before it reached the base. At gates and courtyards, stone channels picked and guided runoff away from thresholds. After storms, teams inspected drains before they inspected bricks. A clean drain was worth a dozen extra stones. Foundations were not modern footings, but they were not random. Crews stripped the topsoil to reach firm ground. On rock, they cut shallow seats. On mixed soil, they widened the base and packed the first lifts with larger stone and coarse fill. The wall's faces leaned inward slightly. This batter spread loads and made the mass fight its own slide. Where frost heave threatened, crews used coarser fill low down to drain water and reduce ice jacking. Tiny movement joints appeared as thin cracks. They were not designed gaps, but they relieved stress. Crews patched them quickly to keep water out. Details mattered at the top. The parapet rose as alternating solid merlons and openings. Openings were angled to widen the field of fire while keeping the shooter covered. Walkways used packed earth, brick, or stone flags. They needed grip in rain and frost. Steps set into towers had consistent rises to keep soldiers from tripping while running. Landings widened near corners so a loaded man or a mule could turn. Doors inside towers had stout lintels and were set back from direct wind to keep flames and smoke from knocking them down in a beacon event. Quality control was simple and strict. Rammed lifts were judged by sound. A dull thud meant the lift was still soft. Crews kept ramming until the tone rose. Stone faces were judged by tight joints and the bite of a pry bar. If a bar found a gap, the joint was redone. Brick was judged by ring and color from the kiln. A pale, underfired brick chipped to dust. An overfired, glassy one was brittle. Stamps on batches meant blame could be assigned. That kept corners from being cut when supervisors turned their backs. Workflows turned materials into speed. One team prepared fill. One set forms, one rammed, another struck forms and moved them forward. A separate crew handled drains and footings ahead of the line so the next day's work sat on dry ground. Stone crews managed their own quarry and pulled carts or sledges along short loops. Brick crews ran kilns in cycles to keep supplies steady. When rain hit, brick crews loaded kilns under cover while earth crews switched to repairs. Managers kept a moving window of tasks so no day was lost. Transport shaped every choice. A basket on a back costs less than a cart on a bad slope. A sledge with 2 men can move stones where a wheel cannot. A goat track that climbs a spur is safer than a muddy traverse with a long drop. The best material is the one that sits within a short haul of the site and can be lifted by the people you have. This rule kept the wall local. It also explains why one valley shows neat brick and the next shows striped earth. A small scene brings it together. Dawn. Frost still holds on a ridge. 2 men set the first lift between forms. One shakes a sieve over the mix to knock out clods. 2 more take turns with long rammers, changing grip to keep rhythm. A foreman checks moisture with a squeeze, then listens as the tone sharpens. Down the slope, 3 women carry water skins from a spring, trade for full baskets of sand, and head back. On the next tower, a mason trims a stone to seat a stair tread. A brick kiln smokes in a hollow that hides the flame from wind. Every few minutes, someone clears a scupper, so meltwater runs away. Nothing is fancy. Everything is deliberate. In a moment, we will see how people and organization made these techniques possible. Materials do not move or stack by themselves. Crews, shifts, rations, rules, and records turn dirt and stone into a frontier machine. Next, we meet the builders, the command chain that kept them working, and the daily routines that held the line. People built the wall: soldiers, conscripted farmers, hired artisans, and the punished. Commanders turned them into crews with clear tasks and simple rules. A frontier project this large could not run on strength alone. It ran on schedules, quotas, rations, and records. The shape of the organization mattered as much as stone and earth. A workday began before first light. A horn or drum called the muster. Squad leaders counted men in tens and hundreds. Foremen issued tools: rammers, picks, chisels, baskets, sledges, ropes, and wooden formwork panels. Quartermasters weighed out grain and salt for the day and marked the ledger. Water carriers filled skins and clay jars from the nearest spring. The plan for the day was short and unambiguous. How many lifts to ram, how many courses of facing to lay, how many drains to open, how many steps to set. A line captain walked the section with the engineer, pointed to weak ground, and approved the sequence. Then the chain moved. Crews were specialized. Rammed earth teams handled formwork, mixing, and compaction. Stonemasons sat on corners, stairs, and tower foundations. Bricklayers worked on parapets, crenels, and tower openings when brick was available. Drain teams cleared channels and set culverts in gullies. Hauling squads moved baskets and sledges up short, well-known loops from a stockpile to the work face. Each squad had a leader who could replace a man, shift a task, or pause the line for a safety check. The engineer did not try to steer every step. He set standards and watched bottlenecks. Training was practical and fast. A new man learned to read soil with his hands. He squeezed a ball, checked if it held shape without shining, then watched the foreman break it cleanly. He learned the sound test for compaction. A dull thud meant keep ramming. A sharper ring meant move the forms. A mason learned to seat a stone so it did not rock under a pry bar. A bricklayer learned to butter a joint thin and even, then strike it to shed rain. A drain worker learned to set a scupper with a slight fall and to keep outlets clear of debris. No lectures, short demos, then repetition. Discipline was firm but predictable. A missed quota triggered extra duty or loss of ration. A falsified count meant a mark in the register that followed a man to the next post. A failed inspection could send a whole squad back to redo a section at night under lamps. But discipline also protected crews. No one placed heavy loads on a fresh lift. No one stacked fuel near a beacon store. No one stood under a raised sledge. Rules that saved time in the morning saved lives before dusk. Command ran in layers. A border commander owned a long stretch and set monthly targets. Section officers broke those targets into weekly tasks. Squad leaders turned them into daily counts. Each layer signed a tally. Tally sticks, stamp tags, and simple paper slips traveled with materials and batches. A stamped brick or a marked bundle of lime tied a product to a kiln and a crew. If a wall face failed after a storm, investigators could walk back through marks and ledgers and find the weak batch. That steady threat of traceability kept quality high even when eyes looked elsewhere. Rations matched the work. Grain and porridge for base energy, a measure of meat or beans when stores allowed, tea or hot water against cold wind on ridges, salt, pickles, and sometimes garlic for long days. Fuel was rationed as strictly as food. Beacon stores of dung and brush were sealed from camp kitchens and checked daily. If a beacon failed in a test, the beacon crew paid with extra night duty and the quartermaster lost face with his peers. Everyone had a share in the signal line because the signal line was what made the wall a living thing. The garrison alternated roles with builders. While one company carried baskets and set forms, another kept watch and drilled. Tower crews maintained the code for smoke and fire, practiced with mantlets and ladders, and inspected the roadway on the wall top. At set hours, a runner carried notes down a side path to a depot and returned with orders. When a patrol reported movement beyond the ridge, the engineer halted work on exposed faces and pulled men into safer tasks under the lee of a tower. The wall never fully stopped. It shifted to a posture that could absorb a shock. Camps were small worlds. Tents or wattle huts stood in the wind shadow of the ridge. A low wall of earth or stone broke the gusts. Latrines sat downslope and away from the spring. Kitchens stood close to the water and to the grain store. A smithy, no larger than a stall, kept chisels sharp, set new rings on rammerheads, and fixed buckles and straps. Tool racks kept formwork pins, wedges, and mallets dry. A talkative clerk set up near the store door and checked names and weights as men came and went. Even in hard weather, the camp held a routine that kept men from wasting effort in small losses. A day on the line had a rhythm. Work began in cool hours. By mid-morning, formwork shifted forward and drains ahead were opened. At noon, crews ate and checked feet and hands for sores and cuts. After midday heat or wind peaked, the line pushed one more lift, set a few more stones, or stacked bricks to cure. The last hour was for cleaning and protection. Mats went over fresh mortar. Scuppers were cleared for night rain. Tools were counted. The engineer walked the face and put a thumbprint in wet mortar at a corner, not as a flourish, but as the record that curing had started at the right time of day. Medical care existed, though it was basic. Herbal salves for blisters and cuts, cloth wraps for sprains, warm water and rest for men who shook with cold after long hours in wind. In frost seasons, men learned to keep a spare set of dry cloth for feet in their packs, and to warm hands on the rammer handles. A lost worker could drag a whole squad's output down. Simple routines prevented that loss. Motivation mixed duty, fear, pay, and pride. A farmer earned tax relief by finishing his corvée. A convict could shorten a sentence by hitting quotas. A soldier earned standing by keeping a tower's reports clean and on time. A mason signed a cornerstone with a mark he would show his son years later. When a section survived a storm with no breaches, the engineer spread praise like a scarce spice. When a breach happened, fixes were made first. Blame was assigned later, and only after a fair check of marks, joints, and drains. Communication moved faster than wheels. Short flags and hand signs controlled the work face so men did not shout against the wind. Runners used fixed paths cut just below the crest so they could move undercover. Message boards hung in the depot with tomorrow's tasks scratched in big characters that a tired man could read. Nothing was left to memory if it could be written. Nothing was left unwritten if it could be stamped. Local communities were woven into the system. Villages near the line supplied fodder, pack animals, and sometimes family members as cooks and water carriers. Markets sprang up on rest days at gate towns. Traders learned the inspection routine and the tolls. In return, the wall road offered relative safety for moving salt, cloth, and grain along the ridge. A project that starved neighbors would have failed within a season. A project that fed them kept hands and hooves close when storms cut supply routes. Small scenes made the organization visible. A foreman taps a lift and listens. A clerk ties a tag around a bundle of lime. A kiln tender checks a vent and watches the smoke change color. A captain rubs frost off a beacon basket rim and checks the fuel. A child from a valley farm hands a jar of water to a water carrier and runs back down the path. The system is not abstract. It lives in the movements of hundreds of people who know exactly where to be and what to do. The chapter's conclusion is simple. People and organization turned dirt and stone into a working border. Clear roles, fast training, layered command, steady rations, and strict but fair records held the line. When the system worked, the wall rose steadily and signals flowed without gaps. When the system stumbled, repairs followed and the routine learned. Next, we look at the hardest problem this system had to solve every day: how to move food, water, fuel, stone, brick, and timber to the ridge and keep it coming when weather and distance fought back. Logistics decides whether stone and earth ever reach the ridge. The rule is simple: move the fewest things the shortest distance with the least waste. Everything else serves that rule. Builders pushed production to the root. They cut quarries on nearby spurs. They opened borrow pits for soil just below the crest, so hauling stayed short and uphill only once. They fired brick in kilns set in hollows that broke the wind and hid sparks. They stored lime, sand, and water in stages along the line so crews never waited on a missing cart. Supply began in valleys. Granaries near gate towns held grain and beans. Yards stacked timber and charcoal. Animal yards kept mules, donkeys, and when the land allowed, camels for the dry belts. A convoy climbed in steps. It reached a mid-slope depot where a wall team took over. Loads split into smaller units for the last steep push. This relay saved animals and men. It also created predictable timing. A foreman could look at the sun and know which depot was sending what in the next hour. Paths mattered as much as materials. Surveyors cut switchbacks on long slopes. They benched the hillside to make narrow shelves just wide enough for a man with a basket or a sledge. On rock, they chiseled shallow steps so feet and hooves would not slip. On loess, they set wattle fences to keep the path from blowing away. In winter, they packed snow on chosen ramps to drag sledges. In summer, they pulled drays on rollers greased with clay. A wheel is a blessing on gentle ground and a curse on a narrow ledge. Teams chose tools for each stretch. A sledge and 2 men can move where a cart cannot. Water shaped every plane. Camps died without it. Crews dug cisterns near towers and lined them with lime. Roofs and paved yards drained into these stores through channels and screens. On dry ridges, water carriers walked fixed circuits to springs at dawn and dusk when wind was low and loss to spill was small. In very arid belts, builders cached jars in shade under overhangs to cool them. Brick kilns had separate water pits so production would not rob the camp. After storms, men cleaned silt from channels before they touched the wall face. A blocked drain today meant a broken corner tomorrow. Fuel was rationed like grain. Brick burned wood and brush fast. If valleys lacked timber, brick became a luxury. Then rammed earth and stone took the load, and fuel went to kitchens and beacon stores. Dung was saved for beacons because it smoked steadily and lit fast. Kiln tenders learned to watch the color of smoke as a gauge of heat. A pale plume meant a cold kiln. A darker thread meant bricks were near their mark. A good batch reduced waste on the wall. A bad batch ricocheted through the schedule for days. The last mile to the crest set the tempo. Foremen broke it into loops. One loop ran from a stockpile to the formwork. Another ran from the drain crew to the next gully. A third fed stones to a tower stair. Each loop took a known time with a known load. When wind rose or heat pressed men down, loops shortened to keep rhythm. When a cloud shelf dimmed the sun and the air cooled, leaders stretched loops and stole an extra lift before dusk. The wall rose on these tiny, repeated gains, heavy pieces moved by leverage, not muscle alone. Crews cribbed stones on wood blocks and rolled them across short spans with pry bars. On steep rock, they drilled shallow holes and set wooden pegs that could be tied into a sling. 3 men on a rope with a drum beat could lift a block up one ledge, set it, and rest. Ramps built from waste stone and compacted soil let teams push loads up to tower platforms. Those temporary ramps were dismantled as soon as the last course settled, and the stone went back into the fill. Nothing was wasted if it could be moved twice. Bridges and fords were part of the plan, not surprises. Where the route crossed a stream, the supply path met a known ford upstream, then climbed on a spur with good footing. In flood season, a temporary footbridge made of pared logs and brush mats might be thrown across a narrow run for men with baskets only. Animals waited until levels fell. The wall could survive a late stone. It could not survive a lost man and a spooked mule line. Desert sections posed a different problem. Sand moves. Crews built small fences of brush and reed on the windward side of the path to break the wind's bite. They laid brush mats under the most fragile stretches to spread weight. They favored dawn and dusk runs when surface grains were cooler and less lively. Soil for rammed cores came from below the crust where less still held together. Pits were backfilled after use to keep the path from sagging. The wall did not try to tame dunes. It skirted them and anchored itself to gravel fans and low rock ribs. Mountain weather made and broke schedules. A clear morning could turn to sleet by noon. A smart quartermaster stacked alternate tasks on his board. If rain came, crews shifted to kiln loading, tool repair, and drain clearing. If wind screamed on the ridge, men moved to the lee side for work on stairwells and tower interiors. Beacon drills did not stop unless lightning threatened. The signal line was the spine that kept the whole organism alive. If a tower could not light on command, a section stood blind. Records kept the flow honest. Each depot wrote what went out and when it should arrive. If a batch missed its window, a runner checked the path for a slip, a broken sledge, or a sick handler. Tally tags on bundles told the receiving foreman which crew had prepared the load. If sand was wet when it should have been dry, the tag put the blame where it belonged. That traceability reduced arguments and idle time. It also taught crews what mistakes cost, in steps and in hours. Animals had their own logistics. Hooves crack on rock and rot in mud. Handlers kept hoof picks tied to belts. They rubbed a mix of fat and ash into small cracks. Loads were balanced with care. A lopsided basket or a swaying jar multiplied fatigue and risk. Rests were short and regular rather than long and rare. A beast that rests often will climb longer. When paths narrowed to a knife edge, loads went on shoulders and backs. A man can flatten to a rock. A mule cannot. Night runs happened, but only by plan. Moonlight on pale rock can be bright and clean. A cool night can double safe hauling compared to a hot day. But night also hides loose stones and dead branches. If a night run was ordered, the path was swept before sunset. Beacons stood ready to guide the last switchback. A single misstep on the final traverse could send a basket tumbling and a man with it. Leaders weighed that risk against the gain and chose sparingly. Emergency resupply plans existed. If a storm cut the main path, a secondary line on the lee side carried only grain, water, and beacon fuel. Crews rationed mortar work and shifted to compaction and stone seating that used less water. Kilns idled rather than starved. Fresh mortar joints were covered with mats weighted with stones so a sudden squall would not wash them out. After the front passed, teams inspected the whole stretch from lowest drain to topmost scupper. Only then did heavy hauling resume. Small scenes show logistics in motion. A file of carriers rounds a spur in the blue hour. Each step lands on the same pale notch. At a mid-slope depot, a woman sets a jar on a bench and ties a fresh tally to a basket of lime. In a hollow, a kiln tender shifts a vent stone and watches smoke thin to a clean thread. On the crest, a boy with a broom clears grit from a tower stair so a mule can turn without slipping. Down in the valley, a clock checks a slate and nods as the last cart creaks into shade. All of this served one purpose: keep the wall face-fed with the right thing at the right moment. No crew should stand idle for lack of water, sand, or a fresh ram ahead. No drain should be blocked when clouds gather. No tower should be hungry for beacon fuel. When logistics worked, the work face felt effortless, almost quiet. When logistics failed, effort doubled and progress halved. The wall taught that lesson every week to anyone who forgot it. The chapter's conclusion is clear. Logistics is the hidden architecture under the stone and earth. It lives in paths and depots, in cisterns and kilns, in loops and tallies. It wastes nothing, moves only what it must, and places each resource within one safe climb of the work. Next, we step onto the wall itself and read the visible architecture: towers, crenels, walkways, gates, and drains, and how this upper layer turns a mass of material into a line of sight, fire, and movement. A wall becomes a weapon when people can move and see on it. The top is a road. The road links towers into one line of action. Width varies by place and era, but the idea stays. Two men can pass with loads. A mule can turn at landings. The surface is firm and slightly crowned so rain runs to the edges. Stone flags or brick make good footing. Packed earth works where weather is kind. Frost demands a texture that grips boots. In heat, joints stay tight so wheels and hooves do not catch. Parapets guard the road without blinding it. The inward parapet protects the walkway from the drop into the court or slope. The outward parapet faces the enemy. It rises to a soldier's chest and is cut by openings. Solid teeth are merlons. Gaps are crenels. Openings angle wider on the inside so a bow or spear can aim without exposing the body. Some crenels have shutters or simple boards that drop into slots. Cornerstones at the top shed rain like a shallow roof. Coping stones tilt outward so water does not sit. Towers break the length into living rooms of defense. Their spacing follows sight, terrain, and the range of signals. A tower stands on a knoll or at a bend so its flanks can see past the next stretch. Inside a tower, stairs and ladders climb in short flights. Steps are even and low to allow a man to run. Landings widen at turns to let a loaded carrier or a mule swing. Wooden landings sit on stone corbels so a fire will not take the whole stair in one breath. In cold belts, small vents release smoke and damp without chilling the men. Beacon gear has its own place. A platform holds a basket or a small stove for smoke and flame. Fuel is stacked dry in a corner behind a low wall. Dung burns steady and visible. Brush flashes bright when a gust hits. The code is simple enough to recall under stress. 1 plume can mean watch, 2 can mean ready, 3 can mean a threat. At night, the same count turns into flame. A tower team drills this more than any fancy drill. The line is only as strong as its slowest beacon. The wall-top road carries orders as well as men. Runners move messages faster than hooves on many stretches. Flags and short horns replace shouting when wind roars across a ridge. A cart may roll on a gentle span near a gate, but most moves use sledges, hand barrows and backs. Where the road steepens, low timber rails help hold loads on ramps. On long down slopes, break stones wedge wheels so they do not run free. The road is not an afterthought. It is the artery that feeds the fight and the build. Firing positions evolve from simple to exact. Loopholes in merlons let archers and later gunners work with cover. Their sills pitch water outward and reduce eddies that blow smoke back. Corner towers gain slits that cover the wall face below at an angle. This crossfire makes scaling ladders hateful work. Small pockets behind merlons hold bundles of arrows or jars of stones. In some places, brickwork projects a short lip so men can see straight down. Where materials do not allow overhangs, defenders use long poles with hooks to drag ladders off the face. Drains keep the wall alive. Every 10 to 20 paces, a scupper cuts through the outward parapet. The walkway has a gentle crown, and water reaches scuppers by shallow grooves. At tower bases, culverts cross the line in gullies, so floods do not strike a blank dam. On steep runs, stepped aprons drop water in small falls, so it loses force. Where lowest turns to glue in rain, a thin stone skin protects the base on the upslope side. After any storm, the first inspection is always drains, then joints, then beacon stores. A dry wall fights. A wet wall fails in silence. Gates deserve special thought. A gate is a promise and a trap. Approach roads zigzag and rise, never giving a straight run. A barbican or outwork breaks the line and forces a turn. That turn exposes a flank to archers and stones. Doors open inward on stout pivots. A drop bar sits in a stone slot so axes cannot reach it. Floors inside gates slope outward to shed water and sand. If an enemy breaches the outer leaf, a second door and a murder alley wait within a short court. These shapes look like pride on a calm day. They are arguments ready for a frantic hour. Inside towers, small rooms serve the fight and the routine. One room stores arrows, lime wash, and spare bowstrings. One holds dried dung and brush for beacons. One keeps ropes, hooks, and spare wedges for ladders and gates. Racks rest on low stone plinths, so damp floor air does not rot wood. In winter, men sleep on raised platforms with braziers sunk into sand pits to capture stray heat and sparks. Thick doors close slow, thin inner screens cut drafts, windows face leeward when possible. The wall face itself helps defense even when silent. A slight inward batter makes ladders lean too far. Rough stones near the base snag feet and hands. Smooth courses higher up reject spikes and nails. Courses step to meet the slope so a climber cannot rest on a safe ledge. Joints are kept tight on the outside to deny fingerholds. On corners, big paired stones lock the turn so a ram's shock does not unkey the whole face. Movement on the top has a plan. Units rest in bays behind towers, not in the center of a span. Pack animals wait in small laybys cut into the inner side. If a beacon is lit, the smoke must not choke the nearest squad. Beacon crews stand windward of their own fire with wet cloth ready. A bad gust can turn a signal into a hazard. The plan sets who clears embers, who relays the message, and who checks the next tower's reply. Practice turns this into reflex. Winter changes the architecture's behavior. Snow collects in crenels and freezes into slick shells. Men carry short brooms to sweep channels before scuppers ice over. Steps inside towers gain sand on the treads for grip. In deep cold, brick rings sharper and cracks easier, so inspections go by sound as well as sight. In spring thaw, water sneaks into joints and then expands by night. Mortar crews chase those leaks fast with thin grout, working in shade so the patch cures slow and strong. Summer brings another set of risks. Heat cooks men on stone walkways. Shade screens stretch on poles in rest bays. Water jars stand in masonry niches along the inner parapet. Lime wash on tower tops reflects sun and protects joints. Lightning threatens beacon stores. Crews ground iron tools and keep fuel covered under clay caps. After any strike nearby, the nearest tower tests its beacon and reports the result on the same day. A short scene ties the parts. Dawn on a clear day. A patrol returns along the top road. Boots click on flags. A runner steps aside into a lay-by to let a mule pass with baskets of sand. The mule's handler taps the inner parapet twice to warn a corner. At the tower, the patrol leader signs the slate and glances at the beacon basket. Fuel is dry. Scuppers are clean. The engineer presses a hand to the wall face where a new patch cured overnight. It is cool and tight. He nods. The line is ready to speak and to hold. This design is not one style. It is a set of answers to the same problems under different skies. Where rock is cheap, towers grow heavy and low. Where brick is plentiful, parapets sharpen and openings multiply. Where rain lashes, drains are dense and aprons wide. Where wind scours, crenels narrow and merlons rise. The logic is constant. The shapes vary with place and time. Next, we read those variations across eras and regions, from early earth lines to later brick crowns, and see how climate and politics left their marks on the same long edge. Eras change threats and tools. The wall reflects those changes. What looks like one edge is in fact many edges, built for different enemies, climates, and capitals. The logic stays. Materials, shapes, and scale shift with time and place. Before unification, border states raised long earth ramparts. Zhao and Yan looked north to the steppe. Qin looked west and around the Ordo's bend. Builders used rammed earth because soil and labor were close and stone was not. Lines climbed ridges, dropped into saddles, and ran across dry plateaus. Towers were simple platforms with fire baskets. The idea was speed and coverage, not decoration. Qin unification tied stretches together. The court enforced standards for width, batter, and tower rhythm. Corvée labor moved by the tens of thousands. Surveyors pushed the line onto high ground with long views. The heart of the work was still earth in formwork, beaten to a dense, ringing body. Where rock stood near the surface, faces gained rough stone to protect the core. The system favored distance covered quickly over heavy masonry at one point. Han power pushed far along the Hexi corridor. The frontier turned into chains of forts, beacon towers, and rammed berms in desert air. Towers marched across gravel fans and lower shelves. Roads and canals fed them. Military farm colonies kept grain close, so convoys did not eat their own cargo. Reports and tallies moved on wooden slips and along ridge roads. The alignment guarded Silk Road lanes as much as it blocked raids. It steered traffic toward gate towns that held stores and officials. Deserts forced special tricks. Earth lifts were thin and dry, sometimes layered with brush, reed, or gravel to break cracks in heat. Timber was scarce, so builders reused formwork and burned dung. Cisterns lined with lime caught rare storms from tower roofs. Beacon towers stood closer where dust and mirage shortened sight. A tower that could be seen in winter could vanish in a summer haze. Spacing reflected that reality. Centuries of division brought new lines. Northern Wei and Northern Qi built fast, long earth walls to check rivals and steppe powers. Work rushed ahead of planting and harvest. Sections rose quickly and weathered hard. Later rulers repaired or shifted them as capitals moved. Sui and early Tang focused on roads and river control more than on a single northern barrier. Where cavalry threat dipped, maintenance won over new building. Where pressure rose, earth ramparts returned on short notice. Under Liao and Jin, frontier logic bent again. Khitan and Jurchen rulers used both natural barriers and man-made lines to guard their own heartlands from neighbors to the south and west. Some stretches in today's Hebei and Inner Mongolia took on new berms, ditches, and beacon posts. Materials stayed local. Rammed earth dominated on the plains. Stone appeared in hills where quarries were near. The rhythm of towers and the codes for fire and smoke remained the glue. Yuan changed the frame. The Mongol Empire erased the northern enemy that had driven much of the earlier building. The wall's role shrank in some zones and shifted to route control and tax points. Older stretches lived as local defenses and administrative lines. The great push to rebuild would come only when a new native dynasty faced new northern riders again. Ming made the most visible crown. After the late 14th century, works near the capital grew heavy and exact. Stone and brick replaced exposed earth on steep ridges. Parapets sharpened. Crenelles gained shapes suited for arrows, crossbows, and then guns. Walkways were flagged where frost bit and rains lashed. Drains multiplied. Passes became fortified complexes with barbicans, flanking walls, and killing alleys. The goal was not only to signal and delay, but also to fight hard on the line. Western and eastern ends received monumental gates. Jiayuguan anchored the far west with a fortress at the mouth of the corridor. In the east, the line met the sea at strong passes and coastal forts. Liaodong gained walls and towns to hold ground against steppe and forest cavalry. Along the Bohai and Yellow Sea coasts, forts trained to face raiders by water. A general famous for fighting pirates tightened training, refined drills, and pushed better gunnery and beacon discipline along coastal and northern stretches. Brick workshops near the alignment stamped units and dates on their products. Stamps turned quality into a traceable promise. Region by region, climate wrote different profiles. In mountains north of the capital, stone abounds and frost heaves. Builders anchored foundations into bedrock, faced slopes with cut blocks, and used brick for stairs and openings. Walkways needed rough flags for boots and hooves. Snowmelt demanded dense scuppers and stepped aprons. On bare uplands and plateaus, dense loess let rammed earth cores shine. Faces might be thin stone or even baked brick only at corners. The mass relied on compaction and a wide base with inward batter. Desert belts asked for patience. Sight lines failed at noon and returned at dusk. Towers stood a little closer. Drains were shallow and long, made to move silt gently rather than fight it with force. Brush fences pinned sand at path edges. Beacon fuel favored dung because brush was scarce and wind was cruel. Cisterns sat under shade and wore clay caps to keep water cool. Work stopped for sandstorms and resumed once grain settled. The schedule respected the air. Coastal sectors bent to sea and salt. Walls tightened around headlands and river mouths. Masonry leaned heavier. Gun ports faced coves and inlets. Towers watched both landward and seaward approaches. Supply moved by boat when roads bogged after rain. Salt air ate iron fast. Crews checked hinges, straps, and nails more often and painted them with oil and soot. Beacon smoke had to rise above morning sea mist, so baskets sat higher and used drier fuel. Materials told the era without a date. Thick, striped, rammed faces with reed ghost lines spoke of early and dry work. Wide earth berms with simple platforms spoke of speed and coverage. Coarse stone faces with rubble cores on the rocky ground spoke of need and thrift. Tight brick courses with stamped marks, neat drains, and refined parapets spoke of late, well-supplied work. Even the angle of a crenelle could hint at the weapon it served. Narrow slits and deep merlons favored arrows. Wider sills and round ports hinted at matchlocks and small cannon. Administration left marks too. In hand zones, you find traces of farm colonies and store pits near gates. You find roadbeds that tied forts into trade. In Ming zones, you find layered garrison towns, inspection yards, and barracks under shadow of major passes. You see paired walls where a second line guarded a vital gap. You see milestones and boundary steles with carved orders and penalties. The wall was never only stone, it was law and schedule written on ground. Tower spacing followed weather as much as math. In crisp winter air, a tower could see far along a ridge. In summer haze, the same tower lost the next signal. Spacing narrowed where fog and dust were regular. It widened where air stayed clear. In open grassland, fire at night carried farther than smoke by day. Codes adapted. One region added sounders and drums. Another relied on flags and mirrors in bright seasons. The line spoke many dialects of the same language. Even within one province, choices diverged. A valley with a good quarry produced sharp corners and straight joints. A valley without stone produced thick cores and minimalist faces. A river bend lent itself to a fort with a water gate and a pier. A high saddle needed only a low wall and a strong beacon to close the gap. The best builders were translators. They took one doctrine and spoke it in granite, in loess, in brick, or in salt spray. The long view is simple. The wall is a mosaic, not a monolith. Qin and the warring states favored speed and reach with rammed earth. Han stretched far west with forts, towers, and farmed supply. Northern dynasties patched and pushed lines as pressure and capital shifted. Ming rebuilt the ridge with stone, brick, artillery, and layered passes. Across all eras, the constant was function. See, slow, steer, and signal. The shape and skin changed to fit ground, weather, and economy. And next, we walk a single section from first stake to final inspection. We set out the line, raise forms, compact lifts, seat-facing stones, build stairs, crown the top road, cut drains, and light the first test beacon. We will watch how standards, crews, and tools turn a length of ridge into a finished unit that can fight and endure. A section begins with a stake in the ground. The engineer walks the ridge at dawn. He sights the next tower location and checks the line of sight. He plants center stakes for the wall and offset stakes for the faces. He marks the batter with simple boards so the wall will lean inward slightly. He scratches shallow channels where drains must cross and where scuppers will later pierce the parapet. He paces the spacing of towers until beacons can answer beacons in clear air. Clearing comes next. Crews cut brush and small roots and pile them away from beacon stores. Topsoil is stripped and stacked downslope for later berms. Stones that can seat foundations are sorted to one side. Rotten rock and loose scree are shoveled off the line. A side path is cut for sledges and baskets. A small depot appears where a spur meets the line. It holds water jars, lime sacks, and tool racks under a simple lean-to. Foundations depend on the ground. On bedrock, the crew cuts shallow seats with chisels and hammers. The seats follow the line and step with the slope. On firm soil, they widen the base and dig down to a tight layer. Coarse rubble and gravel go in first. Men ram the fill until it rings under the maul. The first lifts above the ground are thicker and slightly drier. They act like a shoe and spread the load. A mason sets big paired stones at corners to lock the turn from the start. Formwork rises in short frames. 2 wooden walls stand a forearm apart to receive the first lift of earth. Men mix soil with sand and a little lime dust until a handful holds shape but does not shine. They dump a thin layer between the boards. Rammers take turns with a steady rhythm. The layer compresses and begins to sing. When the tone sharpens, the foreman nods. Boards leap forward, pinned by wedges and ties. A stripe appears on the face. The next lift follows soon after. Rammed earth needs patience. Lifts should be thin and even. Soft spots are found by sound and fixed at once. Day joints are stepped to avoid straight seams through the body. Fresh faces sleep under mats when the wind is harsh. In dry belts, men sprinkle a little water on the surface before the next lift. In damp belts, they let the skin dry longer. Bad moisture means later cracks. Good moisture locks the grains and makes a stone out of soil. Where stone is handy, the crew builds faces as they fill the core. A mason sets a course against the formwork, checking plumb and line with a cord. He leaves flat voids for through stones that bind the face to the core. He watches that vertical joints do not stack one above another. At the next lift, he threads long stones deep into the heart and packs core earth tight around them. Corners get longer dressed stones so stairs and openings will seat cleanly later. Brick enters when clay and fuel allow. A clay pit sits below a shoulder out of the wind. Men knead clay, press it into molds and stack green bricks to dry under cover. Firing happens in clamp kilns built right there. Kiln tenders watch smoke color to judge heat. A good ring under a tap means a sound brick. Bricks move up the hill in baskets and on sledges. They wait under mats until they cool and then go into parapets, stairs and tower openings where precision matters. Mortar ties units into a mass. Lime is slaked in pits until it turns from hot stone to soft paste. Sand and water turn paste into a workable mortar. A thin joint is stronger and sheds water better than a fat one. Crews keep fresh joints shaded. They strike them clean so rain runs instead of sits. Where water bites hard, a little powdered brick or ash tightens the matrix. Mortar is never trusted in the first hours. It needs calm and time. Drainage is installed as soon as the outline allows it. The walkway will later carry a gentle crown. Scuppers are built into the outward parapet at set intervals. Their sills tilt so water drops clear of the face. At gullies, the base gets a small culvert. The culvert faces are stone and the roof is a flat lintel or a small arch. Aprons step the fall of water so floods lose force. Up the slope, shallow ditches borrow a little flow and send it around the base. After each storm, men walk the scuppers first, then the culverts, then the joints. A tower grows with a wall beside it. Its footprint is squared and marked on packed ground. The core fills in lifts like the wall. Floors rest on timber beams seated in stone corbels. Stairs climb in short, even flights. A mule can turn on a landing. Small vents face leeward so smoke and damp can leave. Niches hold arrows, ropes, and beacon fuel. A platform for the beacon rises above the parapet and is paved with flat stone. A low wind wall shields the basket when gusts shift. Walkways and parapets finish the fighting surface. If stone flags are at hand, they go down with tight joints and a slight crown. Where brick is plenty, bricks run in soldier and stretcher courses to lock. Packed earth works if the sky is kind and drains are many. The outward parapet rises to chest height. Merlons stand solid. Openings widen inward so weapons can aim without exposing the chest. Coping stones cap the top and tilt outward. The inner parapet guards the drop into the yard or slope. Simple rails or low walls give pack animals a safe edge at turns. Details pile up and make a difference. Scuppers get small drip noses so water does not streak the face. Steps inside towers are rubbed with sand to grip boots. Door lintels are stout stone and sit under a shallow, relieving arch. Beacon fuel is stacked on a raised plinth so a stray puddle cannot soak it. A small clay cap sits over the stack to keep sparks and rain out. The beacon crew drills the code in daylight and again at dusk. The signal must be simple and the motions automatic. Temporary works appear and vanish. Ramps of waste stone and compacted earth allow heavy blocks to reach the tower platform. A simple derrick lifts beams with a forked pole and a rope. Scaffolds hug the face and tie into holes that will later be plugged. As soon as the last course sets, ramps are dismantled. Their stones go into the next fill. Scaffolds come down and leave no loose holes for water to find. The path is raked smooth so hooves and boots will not trip. Quality control runs each day. A foreman taps new lifts and listens. A pry bar tests a face. If the bar finds a gap, the joint is reset. A plumb line drops from Merlin to base and shows any drift. A cord across the top checks the crown and the fall to scuppers. A jar of water poured at the center must find a scupper fast. If it pools, the crown is wrong and the course is lifted and reset before the sun hardens it. Curing takes planning. Fresh mortar sleeps under mats for days. Fresh rammed faces get a light wetting at dawn and dusk in dry belts. In frost seasons, crews build windbreaks and delay final pointing until a warm run. In heat waves, they work short cycles and cover everything that can crack. No one loads a stair or a parapet before the engineer's mark. A wall rushed today will move tomorrow. A wall given its days will keep shape for years. Finishing closes small risks. Joints at the top of the outward face are pointed thin. Lime wash shines a little and throws sun, but it also seals hairline pores. Marker stones go in at the tower with a date, a distance, and a crew mark. Drains receive screens that stop leaves and brush. A few spare stones sit near corners for quick patches after the first big rain. A tool rack stays in the tower so a small repair does not wait on the depot. The handover is a ritual of trust. The engineer walks the section with the captain. They test a scupper, strike a stair, tap a face, and light a test beacon. The captain reads the code and watches the next tower answer. The quartermaster opens the store and shows grain, water, and fuel. The clerk lays the ledger on a flat stone. It lists batches, crews, and notes on small floors to watch in the first season. The engineer signs and places the section under the garrison. The first weeks after completion matter. Rains find weaknesses that eyes miss. Men patrol after every storm and clear mud from drains. If a day crack opens, a thin grout seals it before night. If a scupper drips on the face, a small lip is added to throw water clear. If a stair treads slick in frost, sand is kept close by. Small corrections prevent big repairs. The section learns the weather and the weather learns the section. One scene shows the end. Evening light runs along the parapet. A runner pours a jar on the crown and watches water find a scupper. It falls clean. On the tower, a beacon glows for a count and dies under a clay cap. A mule turns on a landing and snorts. The engineer rubs a thumb over a cool joint and feels it resist. He nods and steps aside. The line is now a place that can be held. A single section built this way is a unit, not a fragment. It joins its neighbors by road, site, and code. It can take weight, shed water, and speak. It can be supplied in bad weather and repaired in a day after a storm. It is a repeatable answer to the same set of problems along a changing edge. Next comes the reckoning that every builder must face. What did it cost in labor, grain, fuel, and lives? What myths must be cleared? What result was bought for that price? Cost is not just money. Cost is grain, time, lives, tools, and heat. A wall eats what you carry to it. Grain moves men. Fodder moves animals. Fuel fires kilns. Tools wear out. Every step uphill spends a part of the cargo. That is the first price. The state paid in labor and rations. Farmers left fields for corvée. Garrisons rotated from patrol to hauling and back. Artisans left towns in season to cut stone and fire brick. Tax stores filled granaries near gate towns. Those stores fed crews and animals on the climb. When harvest neared, schedules loosened so fields would not fail. The wall that starved its neighbors would die within a year. Opportunity cost was constant. A man with a basket was not plowing. A mule on a ridge was not pulling a cart of salt to market. A beam in a tower was not a roof in a village. Officials weighed these trades each month. Some winters the balance worked. Some summers it did not, and repairs fell behind. The line learned patience because impatience broke it. Human cost shows in small facts. Blisters become wounds in grit and wind. Stones fall. Frost splits skin and dulls hands. Men slip on wet flags at dawn. Heat ruins a day as fast as cold. Camps manage water, rest, and food because a lost worker drags a squad's output down. Simple rules saved lives. No loads on fresh lifts, no fuel by beacon stores, no one under a raised sledge. The rules cost time. They paid back in fewer funerals. Maintenance was the hidden bill. A wall without drains is a wall that ends. Scuppers clog in a single storm, culverts choke on silt in an hour of flood, mortar skins crack in the first freeze. After every rain, men walked the line. They cleared outlets, patched joints, and set lips under drips. They washed steps for slick and added sand. They trimmed brush near beacons. The work of keeping was larger than the work of raising, and it never stopped. Records kept waste low. Tally tags on lime and brick assigned blame and praise. A depot that sent wet sand learned fast when mortar failed. A kiln that burned a weak batch saw its stamp in the ledger under a corner that fell. Traceability was a quiet pressure. It kept joint thickness honest and drains at their slope. Myths grew where facts were thin. One says the wall is a single ribbon you can see with the naked eye from space. The wall is narrow, close to the color of its ground, and broken by slopes. People in orbit see oceans, cities at night, and big fields. The wall sometimes appears in photos with help and perfect light. The eye alone is not enough. Another says bodies were mixed into mortar. Folklore holds grief. Administrative habits hold numbers. Crews stamped bricks, logged mortar, and counted men. Mortar shows lime, sand, brick powder, and ash. The line used the living, not the dead, to hold itself together. A softer myth says it was built once and for all by a single ruler. The edge changed with capitals, enemies, and climate. Early lines were earth and speed. Later crowns were stone and brick near political hearts. Desert belts carried light berms and close towers. Coastal towns built forts that looked both to land and sea. The wall is an archive of answers, not one signature. Did it work? It worked at what it was designed to do. It saw far. It slowed raids. It steered movement into gates. It bought time for men to gather and decide. It carried orders across ranges faster than hooves. It marked safe roads for trade and tax. It turned rumor into schedule and ledger. A raider who kept tempo on open ground slowed to a crawl at a gate. A convoy that feared ambush moved under watch and reached a market. It also had limits. A long, quiet stretch bred lax inspections and bad drains. Bribes opened a gate at dawn. Snow and rain broke parapets and hid gaps in fog. A small force could not hold a long breach if the hinterland was weak. A determined empire could use other routes, exploit politics, and strike where towers soar but could not move. The wall never promised to stop history. It promised to buy the hours in which history is decided. Effectiveness depends on the ratio. If minutes bought exceed minutes lost to upkeep, the line is worth its price. The ratio improved with standards, good drains, clear codes, and fair rationing. It declined with graft, neglect, and vain stone where earth would do. Commanders who counted scuppers and rations won more than those who counted crenels and flags. The wall carried values beyond war. It gave border towns roads, markets, and a sense of place. It pulled crafts to the edge. It trained clerks and quartermasters who would later run canals and granaries. It fixed in memory a northern line where news flowed and orders moved. That memory outlived many towers. It became a story of effort on hard ground. A small scene shows the book and the price. After a storm, a squad walks a span. They clear a blocked scupper with 2 strokes. A drip line on the face dries in sun. A boy carries a sack of sand to a stair and pours a thin trail on the treads. Down in a yard, a clerk adds a short note to a ledger. 2 scuppers cleared, 1 lip added, 1 crack grouted. These 4 acts cost an hour and save a season. That is how a line endures. Another scene shows a myth corrected. A traveler asks a towerman if the wall can be seen from far above. The man smiles and taps the parapet with his knuckle. It rings. He points at a scupper where water falls clean. He points at a beacon cap that fits tight. He says, "This is what matters at arm's length. If each stone does its work here, the message will cross mountains. If not, the sky can keep its view." The reckoning ends with a simple balance. The wall consumed grain, lives, fuel, and time. It also produced minutes, miles, standards, and a shared edge. It was never cheap. It was sometimes wasteful. It was sometimes wise. Where it matched ground and logistics, it paid back in calm years and quick signals. Where it fought water and wind with pride instead of drains and patience, it failed and taught a hard lesson. The last question is what remains. Much has fallen. Much has been rebuilt. Tracks still follow the ridge where the wall road once ran. Villages still sit near old gate towns. Beacon mounds still crown hills that signal to each other at dusk in the mind's eye. What endures most is the method. Use the land, move little, drain well, keep records, practice the signal, buy time, spend it well. Now we can draw the core idea together. The wall is not a fence. It is a network that turns terrain into time and time into control. In the next part, we hold this idea up as the answer the whole story has been leaning toward and show why the organization behind the stone is the true engine of the Great Wall. Here is the answer the whole story has leaned toward. The wall works because it turns terrain into time and time into control. Not a fence, a network. 5 parts move as one body. Root on the ridge, mass that holds, road on top, signals that jump, records that bind. When these parts align, minutes appear where none existed. Minutes become orders. Orders become outcomes. Time is the currency and the product. At the smallest scale, the wall buys minutes on a slope. A ridge forces riders to stretch and slow. A crenel lets an archer shoot twice instead of once. A scupper keeps a walkway dry so a runner does not slip. At the next scale, the wall buys hours across a district. Beacons speak from hill to hill before hooves can cross a valley. A patrol arrives at a gate with time to close a bar. A convoy moves under watch and does not stall in fear. At the longest scale, the wall buys seasons and years. Drains survive monsoon. Standards keep work steady across rains. A road along the crest ties towns into a predictable edge. Time gained at all 3 scales compounds. It becomes control. The network is simple in parts and powerful in some. The route is a line chosen for site and supply. The mass is earth, stone, and brick shaped to fight weather and load. The road is the artery that carries orders, men, and small cargo. The signals are a code of smoke by day and flame by night that outruns horses. The records are tallies and stamps that keep quality and rations honest. None of these alone stops a raid. Together they steer it, measure it, and meet it where the ground favors the defender. The decisive lever is not thickness, it is predictability. A wall without a road and a code is a mute ridge. A road and a code without drains die in the first hard rain. A drain without a ledger still clogs when no one is answerable. Predictability joins them. Tower spacing holds across fog and haze. Drains appear at fixed intervals. Joints cure under mats for days, not hours. Beacons train to one simple count. Ledgers tie a weak corner to a stamp and a kiln. Predictability turns many hands into one habit. Habit turns effort into results that repeat. Water is the hidden enemy and the hidden ally. Manage water and the wall is stone. Ignore water and the wall is clay. Every rule that matters points back to it. Crown the road so rain runs off. Cut scuppers often. Step aprons in gullies. Lift fuel on a dry plinth. Shade fresh joints. Inspect after storms before you inspect anything else. These habits look small. They are the spine. A dry wall fights. A wet wall fails in silence. The signal line is the wall's voice. It collapses distance into decision time. A beacon team lights, counts, caps, and watches for the reply. The next tower answers. The message runs along the ridge. Orders follow on feet. The code is short because stress is loud. 1, 2, 3. Watch, ready, threat. Flags and horns back it when wind kills smoke. The wall's strength is not a flame but a sequence. A sequence practiced so often it survives panic. The ledger is the wall's memory. Stamps on bricks, tags on lime. Tally slips at depots. Notes after storms. Who sent what? Who built which course? Which scupper clogged? Which joint leaked? This memory makes the network learn. A weak kiln batch does not repeat. A bad drain slope is corrected along the whole section. A good trick in frost moves to the next valley by a line on a board, not by rumor alone. The wall is an archive of fixes that stick. The design logic is a closed loop. See, slow, steer, and speak. Seeing comes from ridges and tower rhythm. Slowing comes from batter, bends, stairs, and the narrowness of passes. Steering comes from barbicans, sidewalls, and roads that favor the defender's turn. Speaking comes from beacons and runners on the crown. Each loop feeds the next. When you speak, you move. When you move, you meet the slowed threat where you plan to meet it. When you meet it there, you hold. The human system is the engine. Crews learn short tests for soil and stone. Leaders set quotas that a tired man can still count. Rotation keeps fields alive and camps supplied. Punishment is real, but so is protection. No loads on green lifts, no fuel near beacons, no one under a raised sledge. Pride is allowed in small marks. A cornerstone a mason can name. A ledger a clerk keeps clean. A beacon a tower crew can light in wind with eyes shut. Skill and routine reduce risk and noise. The mosaic across eras proves the rule. When speed and reach mattered, rammed earth ran far and thin with close towers. When pressure near the capital rose, stone and brick thickened ridges and sharpened parapets. When deserts and coasts demanded special answers, spacing, drains, and gun ports adapted. Politics changed, but the method stayed. Use local material. Keep the road alive. Train the code. Drain. Record. Repeat. The shapes differ. The logic persists. Effectiveness can be stated as a ratio. Time gained versus time spent. If minutes saved by sightlines, roads, and signals exceed minutes lost to repairs and hauling, the wall pays for itself in security. That ratio improves with standards, honest rations, clean drains, and simple codes. It collapses under pride, graft, and neglect. Leaders who count scuppers and rations win more than those who count crenels and banners. The ledger's dull lines beat a speech on a sunny day. A clear image fixes the payoff. Night on a ridge, wind low, a thin moon. A tower crew opens a clay cap and lights a tight basket. One flame, then two, then three, counted on a steady breath. On the next height, a reply. Down the line, another. In a gate town below, a captain hears a horn and moves men to the barbican. On the wall road, a runner passes two carriers and taps the inner parapet as he turns a corner. In a depot, a clerk pulls a slate and checks the beacon test from the last storm. Nothing is grand. Everything works. The line has turned space into time and time into choice. The core idea is now plain. The Great Wall's power is organizational, not monumental. It is a repeatable way to turn local earth and stone, short paths, simple codes, and steady habits into a living border. It buys the hours in which leaders choose, soldiers move, and markets open after fear recedes. This is the answer that closes every promise we made. The line is not long because it is big. It is long because the method scales. Use the land. Move little. Drain well. Keep records. Practice the signal. Buy time. Spend it well. You have seen the method behind the stones. The wall works because it turns terrain into time and time into control. It is not one ribbon in the dust. It is a network that links ridges, roads, signals, and records into a living edge. We mapped why the line bends with passes and basins. We opened the body of the wall and watched earth compact, faces lock, and mortar cure. We met the crews who made that routine possible and the managers who turned quotas and rations into steady output. We climbed the supply paths, counted loops, and watched kilns breathe. We walked the top road, read towers, drains, and crenels, and saw how the fighting surface thinks. We compared eras and regions and read climate and politics in brick, stone, and loess. We built one section end to end and then paid the bill in grain, fuel, labor, and years. We cleared myths and measured results by the only ratio that matters: time gained against time spent. What remains today is more than ruins. Ridge paths still follow old crowns. Gate towns still sit where routes converge. Beacon mounds still mark lines of sight that made decisions faster than hooves. The method endures beyond the materials. Use the land, move little, drain well, keep records, practice the signal, buy time, spend it well. You can apply the same logic anywhere scale and risk meet. A levee fails without drains and inspection. A road fails without honest loads and repair. A data line fails without simple rules and clear alerts. Predictability wins more than pride. Standards beat speeches. Small checks done on time save whole seasons. If you want a deeper dive next, choose the terrain. We can break down a desert span where sight dies at noon and returns at dusk. We can dissect a mountain pass where stairs, aprons, and culverts do most of the work. We can study a coastal fort where wind, salt, and gunnery set the rules. We can live a day with a tower crew and run real beacon drills under weather and stress. Each path shows the same doctrine speaking a different dialect. For a wider view, pick a connected story. How the Silk Road ran on depots, wells, escorts, and tax yards along this edge. How Rome paved an empire with gradients, drains, and milestones that echo the wall road. How the Inca tied mountains with stone paths, relay runners, and storehouses. How Hadrian's frontier compared when climate, tools, and goals were not the same. Each one tests the method across cultures. If this journey helped you see the wall as a system and not a postcard, save the video. Subscribe if you want more long, structured breakdowns like this. Tell us in the comments which section to open next: desert, mountain, or coast, or a full day in a beacon tower. Your choice sets the next map and the next set of tasks. We close where the line has always lived, on a ridge that is also a road. A clean scupper, a tight joint, a simple code, and a ledger that remembers. Nothing grand, everything working. That is how stone becomes time, and time becomes a decision you can make before the dust arrives.